Hello everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our series on intellectual property and technology transfer titled Intellectual Property, Protect, License, and Negotiate. I'm Trang Nguyễn, the Senior Research and Planning Officer in Fulbright University, Vietnam. Along with me today is Paul Stewart, who is an international licensing expert, managing director for Basco Ventures LLC. We may stand to learn a great deal from his extensive knowledge and rich experience, but honestly, what has impressed me the most, even after knowing him for 10 years, is his motto of doing deals that help make our world a better place to live. Let's welcome Paul Stewart. Moving into today's agenda, I'm introducing about the webinar, and I'm going to be talking about through basic concepts on understanding intellectual property. Then we will have a very short break, and Paul is going to talk about IP licensing and negotiation. Finally, we will have a Q&A session. Just a couple of things to keep in mind that by registering and participating in this webinar, you consent for Fulbright University Vietnam to retain your personal information in accordance with the privacy policy with respect to processing user personal data, which is in line with Vietnam government's Decree 30 in 2023 on personal data protection. We also have disclaimer that references to particular images, products or services, patents, trademarks, companies, and/or organizations in this webinar are for illustrative and educational purposes only, and do not constitute or imply endorsement by any agencies or organization. We do not provide legal advice. Please remember that, because they should be shared with you by your IP lawyer or attorneys. Right now, I'm doing a little bit of housekeeping. Please use the same name as you registered with while joining this webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the slides along with the recording will be shared on our webpage in a few days after the conclusion of the webinar. Due to time constraints, we kindly request you to post your questions in the Q&A box so that we can compile and address them during the Q&A session at the end. If we are unable to answer all questions, no problem. We will follow up with the answers via email. The chat box is for us to share general information, relevant links, and for you to provide brief responses to our interactive questions. Please use the Q&A box for posting your questions instead of the chat box. Later, we would appreciate if you could spare about 2 minutes maximum to complete a survey that we will send you via email. We are interested in knowing if you are satisfied with this webinar and if you have any suggestions for our future ones. After completing our survey and based on Zoom records of your participation, you will receive a certificate of attendance signed by Fulbright University Vietnam. All set. So let's jump in my presentation. That is understanding intellectual property. I'm going to give you an overview of intellectual properties and intellectual property rights. From now, we will call IP for short and IPRs for short. Introducing basis of patent, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and a little bit of IP in university. So IP refers to creation of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. They come from your brain, your mind, nobody else but yours, the creation of your mind. Patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets offer different types of protection or IP rights. If you think that any or all of them will help you or your organization, feel free to have their protection. Essentially, IPRs can be viewed like any other property rights. They are for a limited term. They don't last forever, and they also territorial. There's no such thing as a worldwide patent. If you file a patent application in Vietnam and you are granted that patent, well, you have protection in Vietnam and within its territory. Please understand that you don't have such IPR in foreign countries. In case that you are going to do international business, then research on internet the laws of whatever countries you're going to be doing business in, or the best way, contact a lawyer, etc. Governments grant IPRs in exchange for the public disclosure of invention. When you file a patent application, for example, you need to include all the information on how to make and use your invention. And what IP Office do in turn is they will publicly disclose such knowledge for the world. And if you are granted a patent, people can look up and understand how to make a user invention. That can inspire them to potentially improve or add on and make it do different things. And so that's how technology advances to somebody invented something and somebody saw it and they were like, wow, that's awesome. What if I have it more something? I will improve it in somehow. So inventors are usually inspired from previous invention. Nice picture, Hans. So we will firstly talk about patents. Most of the times when you hear the word patent, people are referring to a utility patent. Utility patents protect invention that fall within four statutory categories that are process, machine, article of manufacture, and composition of matter. In the image is a project of engineering students with their solar-powered generator. And as mentioned earlier, the government is granting you the right to stop others from making, using, selling, and importing your invention in exchange for the public disclosure of your inventions. Now, think of the solar-powered generator. What if solar panels the students are using is my utility patent and it is developed? Well, they would need to my permission to produce it, and I have the right to stop them from making their generator. And that's where licensing comes into play. Hong will discuss this in specific in the later part. While now plants patents are given to asexually reproduced plant varieties, and they have to be discovered in a cultivated setting, which means you have to be able to repeatedly asexually reproduce your plant. You cannot just go into a forest, pick a flower, and claim your plant patent. You must show that you can reproduce this new variety that you have created. That's all different kinds of plant patterns out there. For example, red Siamese coconut in this image had red sprout shell and sweet juice. It mix is used for make oil, for cake, jam, candy, and byproducts are used as animal feed or fertilizer. Design patterns protect new and non-obvious ornamental aspects of product. The examiners don't care what it does or how it functions. They just examine the characteristic look of this object. Design patents last 15 years from the date that they are issued. It's different from the utility patent from the date of filing, but here the protection term are 15 years from the date that they are issued. Think of things like toy, bicycle, car, etc. None of their manufacturer wants anybody to copy their designs, right? If you look at a car, for example, you can tell where it's from without seeing its logo or name just by looking at the distinctive headlights, the hetero doors, and paint color. So those are protected through design patents. Why patent? We talk about all three types of the patents. So why we have to protect our invention? Because it gave us right and it encourages invention. It promotes commercialization and application of invention. And lastly, it accelerates the commercialization of invention to the whole society. For that, Paul is gonna talk in a real case, real experience in his time. Okay, moving on. Trademark is any word, name, symbol, device, or any combination thereof used to identify the source of products and services. It distinguishes the source of a product or service, and it also distinguishes a company over a competitor. It's important that when your trademarks are registered, they give you right to enforce nationally and bring legal action in courts. They serve as basis for a filing, and they will be publicized in trademark database. Are you all still with me? Is it a little bit too fast? Hey, why trademarks? Because trademark allow consumer to identify and distinguish the source or producer of different products and services over competitors. It encourages trademark owners to provide goods and services of consistent quality and to build goodwill in the trademark. Imagine that, I'm a Vietnamese and we are uh, eating fish sauce. You know fish sauce? Many fellow here from Vietnam, they will immediately know what I mean. But we have so many brand, so many options for fish sauce here in Vietnam. But I have just one name in my mind, Hưng Thịnh. So I will go straight to the shop nearby my house or supermarket, wherever, and I will pick one immediately. I don't need to consider other brand. So this is a benefit of trademark is encourage a brand to provide goods and service with consistent quality. That's the point. That's important. And you will see later that for trademark is lasts longer. Most of the time, this lasts longer than other IP rights. Moving on to copyright. Copyright protects original works of authorship, including literary, dramatic, musical, artistic, and other works fixed in a tangible medium. Copyright protection is secured ultimately upon creation or fixation. A work is created when it is fixed in a copy for the first time. No publication or registration is required. There are, however, advantages to registration. Like you are writing a poem, the minute you put your pen to paper or type it to your computer, the copyright is established. So copyrights are secure, are secure automatically. But for example, in Vietnam, if you register with the Copyright Office, you will have no obligation to show evidence that it's yours when there comes a case in court or you are legally sued by another party. There are two types of copyrights. Moral rights, which protect the non-economic interests of the author, encompassing four key aspects. Right to be identified as the author, like my name's there, I'm the author. Right to object to derogatory treatment. Right to object to false attribution. There's no permission from mine. This is not allowed. And right to object the issuing to the public of distorted work. And economic rights, which allow the rights owner to derive financial reward from the use of their works by others. Right owners can authorize or prohibit reproduction of work in various forms, such as plain printed publication or sound recordings. Well, I have to say that you have no rights to record this webinar. The copyright is belong to mine and Paul for later parts. For example, distribution of copies of the work, public performance of the work, broadcasting or other communication of the work to the public, translation of the work into other languages, and adaptation to the work, such as turning a novel into a screenplay. Again, why is important? Most copyright laws state that the rights owner has the economic right to authorize or prevent certain uses in relation to a work, or in some cases, to receive remuneration for the use of their work, such as through collective management. Wow, charming. Trade secrets. Trade secrets are exactly what the words say. Secret. Don't tell us. Don't let us know. Patents, trademarks, and copyrights, as you remember, all are the ones we talked about. You file them, you register them, or you publicize them. But with trade secret, we outsiders should know nothing about them. Otherwise, they will no longer be considered a trade secret. One important thing here, your trade secret can't just be something that's generally known or easily found online or somewhere else. It has to be information that gives you an economic, a competitive advantage over your competitor. Imagine that the list of your provider has disclosed by your staff, your employee, and well, somehow a competitor find out. This will cause you damage, economic damage. And one advantage here that there's no set term for protection of trade secret. Well, for patent, we have like something 20 years, less than 20 years, but here, no set term for protection as long as it kept secret. So, well, it's so confused, but well, how to lose a trade secret? Nobody wants to lose it, right? So there are some cases here I want to mention. You should like don't make any of the following action, like failure to take adequate steps to prevent disclosure. You have to make it confidential. You have to have mutual agreement that non-disclosure with your staff or employees, and uh, owner or co-owner or owner authorized disclose have to be like prohibited from show anything outside of the company. And sometimes, although that we keep it secret, but a trade secret can be well become a public domain, becoming in public domain when it's reverse engineering. And when other independently develop it, it's no longer be your only trade secret. Okay, later we will publicize our slide, and I think that this one I have given you summaries here, and I think that's all my presentation can be condensed here with this slide. You see, we have utility or plan patent, design patent, trademark, copyright, trade secret, and I divided into what protects against what, until when, and rise of independent third-party creator. And lastly, let's talk about a little bit IP in university. We all know that university and research institutions are the factories of the knowledge economy. Each and every universities have to establish and develop their own regulatory policies for IPRs, again within universities. They need their capacity to encourage IP access. And IP management is a combination of strategic and operational activities relevant to IP or IPRs. The greatest challenges often lie in the communication between the individual actors, as well as undefined tasks, responsibilities, and processes. Universities and research institutions have duties to raise IP awareness both inside and outside of their organizations. By that, they build their capacity and manage IP effectively. I think that's the three are not separated, but meant to relate and affect each other. Okay, we come to an end.
My name is Paul Stewart. Good morning, at least if you're in Vietnam. If you're somewhere else in the world, good afternoon or good evening. I am in Denver, Colorado, United States. So actually, if you've just come back from the break, I am actually sitting, looking out to the Rocky Mountains in the United States, and I can see actually the snow-capped mountains out there. It's the sun is going down, and it's going to be dark here before too long. You see there's red dot on my screen. In the old days, when we made presentations in person, we had laser pointers. But someone, speaking of intellectual property, and Trang was very insightful when she talked about you can't give someone a worldwide license if you don't have worldwide rights. So if you have patents that have only been granted in 3 countries, then technically you can only give them those a license to those rights in 3 countries. The other you might give show how, know how rights, but it would not be a right to a patent in any of the countries outside of there. But the reason I wanted to mention about laser pointers is there is a company called Logitech, and this is actually, I do not own stock in the company. I don't have anything to do with Logitech other than this is the device that I'm using here tonight, my time, and I can use this to point the red dot on my screen. So when you have Zoom calls or you're using Microsoft Teams or something, I can use this to essentially like the laser pointer in the old days. Now, I just went on to the Logitech website and I actually found the link. So I've just put into the chat box there. That's the English page. I don't know if you can access that from Vietnam. If not, let me know. I could probably send a box of these to Trang and she could get them out to you. But they're about $100 US. They're not cheap, but it's wonderful when you're making presentations because, for example, I can push this button and it will blank my screen and make it completely black so I don't distract you so you can be looking at me if I'm talking. And then I push this button and the screen comes back on. So it's quite handy. I'm going to cover a lot of slides with you today, so buckle up. It's going to be rather fast. I'm going to be talking about IP licensing and negotiations, and I'm hoping we'll have a really good time here as we go through this. It's a lot of fun, and it's one of my favorite topics. As you can see here in the box down at the bottom, I'm going to speak on this general topic for about the next hour, and then answer your questions after that. If by chance you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A box. I have that brought up on my computer here. I actually have 2 computers. I have an iMac that's in front of me that I use for web things. And actually then I have a MacBook Pro and a 43-inch diagonal screen, a very, very large screen that I can put actually 2 or 3 documents side by side when I'm looking at contracts and things. So it helps me. Anyway, enough of that. So the other thing you might have noticed in my name, it says that I'm a certified licensing professional. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to the website for the licensing CLP. It's licensingcertification.org. The exam that you would have to take to pass and become a CLP is given in April and October of each year. And it's given in person, 400 places around the world, I think, including in Vietnam. But now, since COVID, they've rolled out what is called LOP, or live online proctoring. So you can actually take it from the comfort and convenience of your home or your computer or at work or wherever you want to be. And it's much more convenient that way as long as you have a camera. There's also what's called a CLP associate. If you're interested in licensing, you can, just by taking 8 hours of courses and doing a little bit other, if you're wanting to become a CLP eventually, you can get that. Even though you have less experience as you prepare for the CLP exam, you can get the CLP associate designation that tells people that you're wanting to become a certified licensing professional. The exam itself has 150 questions, and they give you 3 hours to take the exam. If you have any disabilities or, for example, learning or dyslexia or anything, they do make accommodations for that, and you just need to request those ahead of the testing date so they can be reviewed. I will tell you that I was grandfathered in many years ago when CLP was formed. I was grandfathered in as a CLP, but I became president of the organization, and while I was president, I imposed a policy that any of the board members who were board members who had been grandfathered in would also have to take and pass the exam to continue on the board of directors. I had not taken an exam in many years when I did that, so I will tell you I was scared to death, but I did pass it. I will tell you that today's webinar that I'm delivering right now actually qualifies for your CLP education credit, continuing education. But as I like to say, if I can pass the CLP exam, you can pass the CLP exam. So it's a wonderful way to advance your career if you want to be in intellectual property licensing. And it's a wonderful profession and a lot of fun, and you meet some wonderful people. Okay, here we go. Now, a question already. Thank you, Anonymous. Do I have to be a technical expert or an engineer to take CLP? No, I'm not at all. I'm not a lawyer. You have to have a bachelor's degree or equivalent from any university or equivalent. And I think it's 3 years of experience. So thanks for asking that. And I guess I need to be clicking answer live, and I did. So that I hope that answered the question. So if not, chat back in the chat box and chime in there. Okay, so this is the audience participation section. Okay, I want to ask each of you watching, what do you see here? Okay, so let's look at this picture. Okay, and I want you to type in either in the question and answer box or in the chat box, either one. I want some brave souls to go ahead and chime in and type in what you see in this picture that you're looking at. Okay. Now this means, okay, I see a woman's face. Okay, that's very good. Thank you, Dawn. Okay, that's very good. What else? Does anybody see anything about a woman's face? A moon. Okay. A person with a scarf. Okay. Is this an old person or a young person, or you said it's a woman, so anything else that anybody observes? Thank you. Samad, I'm not sure I see. Okay, wait. Amali says a young woman. Wait, here now. James just said this is an old person, a middle-aged person, a young person. Ooh, this might be confusing. A child with a fur scarf. Okay, this is getting fun. We're looking at one picture, and people in this group are coming up with different conclusions with no wrinkles. Oh, a child with a fur scarf with no wrinkles. Okay. This person who says they see an old person, does the person have a small nose or a big nose? James, do you want to chime in or come off of mute? If you want, you can turn on your video or unmute your microphone if you want to. Well, this is what is called a visual. It's kind of like a visual puzzle to some extent. Okay, somebody says the nose is not visible. That's interesting. Okay, so here's what's interesting. Does anybody see where the nose is visible? But does anybody see? Can you type in that if the nose is visible? What do you see if the nose is visible? That's okay. So type in if you want. I'm going to continue explaining this. This was first introduced to me when I was a first-year student at Harvard Business School many, many years ago. And this, you might call it an optical illusion of sorts. This actually is intended to make you think about that sometimes people will look at exactly the same information and come to completely different conclusions. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that when I first saw this picture, I looked at it, and I will tell you, I saw an old woman. An old woman, you said? Somebody said a young child or a young woman. What I saw was an old woman who had a fur coat. So this is the fur coat you can see here. And she actually had a very big nose. So if you look closely, this thing right here, when I saw it, I thought this thing here was a very big nose on this woman. And it looked like right up here, just near the top of her nose, she had some kind of a wart or a mole up here on the top of her nose, as you can see. And her eye was right here, was somewhat closed and kind of had wrinkles on it, okay? So as you can see, I was concluded that was the old woman. And her mouth, as you see here on the thing, was open slightly, but this is her mouth open very slightly. And her kind of chin is big down here. And she had a shawl, a white shawl around her hair, around her head. So all of a sudden you look at this and somebody says, well, that's not a young woman. How do you see a young woman? Well, if you haven't seen the young woman yet, let me help you, because I did not see the young woman when I looked at this picture for the very first time. The young woman is wearing a necklace. So what is the mouth on the old woman right here is actually kind of a necklace. And this is actually the chin. What is the nose of the old woman is the chin of the young lady. And what was the eye of the old woman is the ear of the young woman. And actually, you can see just a little touch of her nose of the young woman looking away from you. And this, of course, is a feather in what appears to be a hat, and so on. Okay? Now, why did I spend all this time looking at this strange picture of what can be a young woman or an old woman? We all can be presented with the same information and come up with different conclusions. And when I talk about intellectual property licensing, that's exactly what sometimes you will observe, that I will say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what I'd like to start today is I've got 6 things to cover with you all today. I want to start off with 3 true stories that will actually set the stage for the rest of the time that I'll be spending with you today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what actually is IP licensing and what do big companies from the US look for in their IP deals. Third, I'm going to go through 3 of my own interesting IP licensing deals that I've been involved with over the years. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can negotiate an IP license. And there are 2 things that are commonly referred to in licensing and negotiations called ZOPAs and BATNAs. And we're going to talk about what a ZOPA and a BATNA is. So you'll know that when you get done with the session today. Fifth, I'm going to talk about what are some important tech transfer skills and what it's like to be a licensing professional. And then finally, we'll close with your questions, and I hope I'll be able to answer some of your questions here as we go through. So let's start with the 3 true stories. I love true stories because it's taking actual real life stuff that happened and relating it so you can perhaps relate it yourself. Let's take this first story from America. You all may have heard of Stanford University out in California. I know a man who's actually been on the Certified Licensing Professionals Board of Governors. His name is Luis Mejia, wonderful guy. And Luis actually was in the tech transfer office at Stanford. And this graduate student came into this. Luis told me about this story of this true student, came into his office and he says, I've got a great idea. I think what I believe is a patentable idea. And I want to sell this, to someone here in California or somewhere. And this grad student said, if I can just get $1 million US for this, I will be satisfied. I don't want anything more, and my life will be complete because I've got this great idea, but I want to get $1 million for it so I can say I did that. So Luis said, no problem. Let's go down to what is called Sand Hill Road. And Sand Hill Road is near Stanford University. So they went down to the tech transfer office, which is where Luis worked. He said, I'll help you. Let's put together your presentation and you'll talk about your patent and the filing of your patent and so on. So we'll go down and we'll ask for $1 million. So they did. They went to several of these venture capitalists in the Palo Alto, California area, and they asked for $1 million in funding for this idea that this student had. Well, unfortunately, all these venture capitalists down on Sand Hill Road, when they said, would like you to make $1 million investment, they said, no, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested. This just doesn't look that interesting to me. And they were kind of, well, maybe if it were $250,000 and $500,000, I might consider it, but they were like not very interested. Well, Luis said, I know some Microsoft millionaires up in Seattle, Washington, and I have a travel budget. So let's do this. Let's work on your presentation a little more. It needs a little more polish. We're going to fix up your presentation, and then we're going to get on a plane and we're going to fly up to Seattle and we're going to meet a couple Microsoft millionaires. But instead of asking for $1 million, let's just ask for $500,000. So they went to 5 or 10 of these Microsoft millionaires, okay, up in Seattle, and they were trying, asking for $250 or $500,000. They couldn't even get these Microsoft millionaires to offer up $50 or $100,000 for this grad student's idea. Okay. By now, the grad student is very disappointed, as you might imagine. He's now going, wait a minute. I'm a grad student at Stanford. I keep getting all of these offers from these credit card companies that have credit cards. And each credit card he's told Luis that he had gotten several dozen of these cards, and each of the different cards had a credit line on it. So let's say $10,000 or $20,000 that he could get. And he said, if I took those 20 or 30 different credit cards and I maxed out those credit cards, I think I could even survive in my business for a year on the credit cards and actually get it to cash flow positive and pay off my credit cards. I don't need these Microsoft millionaires or these venture capitalists. Some people call them vulture capitalists, but because they were wanting the entire control of his little business and his idea. So does anybody know what happened? This is one of the wonderful stories that I love to tell. Okay, I will tell you. Here's the actual patent. If you go into the United States Patent and Trademark Office, they have a full text and image database, okay? This is the actual patent number, 6285999. It issues on September 4th, 2001. And this sounds like a pretty boring name to a patent: method for node ranking in a linked database. You could probably fall asleep, looking at that. You can imagine that patent is pretty boring, right? Guess what? What you don't know is that graduate student who came to talk with Luis was a young man at the time named Larry Page. And he was, of course, Larry Page and Sergey Brin were one of the two co-founders of the company Google. And sure enough, here you see inventors Larry Page, Lawrence Page, Stanford, California. And he filed it back actually January 9th, 1998. So it took a while for that patent to make its way through the patent office, probably because they had to convince the patent examiners that it was a good idea and everything. So interesting that this idea that became Google was passed up by all these venture capitalists and Microsoft millionaires. They told Larry Page, not interested. Wow. So when you think about that old woman and that young woman in the picture, I like to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some people saw one thing and some people saw another. Now, of course, we know what Google is, and it's one of the most valuable companies in the world. Let's talk about the second story, which I experienced myself in China. And this is when I was actually still at Eli Lilly and Company, where we were meeting with some people with an absolutely remarkable technology in the pharmaceutical space. Quite fascinating. The science was good. It had, because of its efficacy and the particular ability to control the particular pathogen, it had significant global revenue potential. And they had even filed what are called composition of matter patents in China. And you remember when Trang was talking back earlier in this evening or this morning your time, one of the types of patents you can file is a composition of matter, or the chemical structure of the material. So those had been filed in China. That's great. And I said, so I was sitting in the meeting and I said, well, that's wonderful. Have you filed these patents in any countries other than China? And they paused for the longest time. And they said to me in the meeting, well, we've looked, but we've missed the deadline for filing the patents anywhere else in the world except for China. So they had not filed in Europe under what is called EPO, the European Patent Office, or in the United States, or other places where this might have been very interesting. So they had lost the possibility to get patent protection in these other countries, only in China. What happened? Unfortunately, we regretfully told them that with only a patent in China, we would not be able to commercially, it would not be commercially viable for us. So we were not able to continue, and that opportunity did not go further. And unfortunately, what was a great technology could have found its way, but did not. What's the lessons learned from these two stories? Well, I think first, I mentioned in just a minute ago that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In the case of Google, the venture capitalists did not see how amazing that company was going to be. In the case of this technology in China, they did not realize how much potential it had, and they missed filing the patent in the other countries, so they lost patent protection, which unfortunately made it almost of no value. I think the other thing that I observe is even the best minds in the world can sometimes miss world-changing transformational inventions like Google, those search engines. These were very bright people looking at this. Why didn't they figure this out? So it's sometimes new ideas are so crazy or so different that you can't get your mind around how it will be different in the future. And then I think the other comment I would make is if you are looking at a technology and you're wanting it to have major global interest as far as in industrial companies, you're going to need to have patent coverage in all major countries of the world, at least Europe, United States, and so on, where those opportunities exist. Okay, any questions? Again, you pop them into the chat box or into the chat or the Q&A box. Either one is fine. Let's go to a third true story. This was told to me by the man who was participating in this. He was involved, actually, he was the owner of a company that was considering acquiring a biotechnology firm. And by the way, this was not a deal when I was at Lilly. This was after I was gone from Lilly. This man actually was quite interested in this company, so they had scheduled a tour of this potential partner company. They were going to go take a look. They were going to tour the labs, the laboratories. They were going to meet with the chief scientist of this company to discuss not only the company, but the technology that they had, because as it had been explained to him at the beginning of their discussions, this technology had quite significant potential possibilities for commercial sale and so on. Now, unfortunately, when people, somebody's asking a question, a question that China does have traditional knowledge protection separately from patent system. That's a good question. In China, it's commonly referred to as TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine. And these medicines are discovered and derived from herbs or other I'm going to call it botanicals or biological products. I am not aware, I will say that, I am not aware that there is any protection separately from patents unless there is a plant variety protection of the botanical that comes from that. If there is somebody in the audience that knows that that there is patent protection, please chime in here. This is a real live thing, so chime into the chat box if anybody knows about that. So unfortunately, is what happens in these kinds of situations when you travel around the world and so on. You can sometimes, with jet lag, you can get mixed up on scheduling, and they actually mistakenly arrived 2 hours early to the parking lot of this partner company. What's interesting is, Trang will laugh, I was thinking this session with you guys was going to actually occur 24 hours from now, and about 15 minutes before we started, she sent me a WhatsApp message and said, "Are you joining?" Yes, and you're laughing because it's true. I realized that, I had a mix-up myself. So my point to you all is these things can happen with everybody, okay? I had a mix-up just this evening and in a scheduling mix-up. It was in my calendar for this time tomorrow. So these people arrived 2 hours early to the parking lot of the partner company. Okay. Now, this is the scary part. This guy was sitting inside his rental car in the back of the parking lot. They just kind of pulled in, and they didn't want to go up to the front door immediately, but they sat there looking, and they were in shock and disbelief as a bus that was right up next to the door to the company, the back door to the company, was unloading about 30 or 40 actors and actresses. These were not real scientists. These were just men and women who were paid to come for the day, and they were actors. And as they got off the bus, someone was handing each person a white lab coat as they got off the bus, and then they filed them into the back door into the laboratory of this company. Yes, you can imagine that this was not what this guy thought he was going to see when he came to do the due diligence visit. In what city did this occur? I want to now ask you guys, audience participation again. Let's chime in, okay? This is, don't be afraid. There's maybe not any right answer, and there may be more than one right answer, but there's a particular place where this story occurred. So does anybody want to take a guess? I will tell you, it was not Ho Chi Minh City. It was not in Ho Chi Minh City. So would you like to go ahead and chime in here, either in the Q&A box or in the chat box? Please dial. Okay, California, Hollywood. Yeah, no kidding. With actors and actors, you'd expect to have all kinds of actors and actors available, but it was not Hollywood. But that's a great, I like that one. I like that answer. That's a great one. Any other guesses? People guess all kinds of countries and so on around the world. Believe it or not, this occurred, true story, in Boston, Massachusetts, USA. And I was blown away to hear this. I could not believe this happened. Needless to say, this investor did not invest in this company. These people were all actors and actresses, and he decided to play it along and see what happened. And then he, played along, and then uncovered, asked the questions, and then uncovered the what was going on. I like to say is, why is this important? This story important to you? Because you're sitting here in a university, but someday you may be either in a tech transfer office or getting ready to license a technology like this. I think that wherever you do business in the world, you might say, oh, well, if I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, I think everybody is going to be honest with me. There's a lot of universities there, and those people are ethical. Think of all those wonderful colleges like Harvard University, right? But you have to be thorough and vigilant and pick your partners, your business partners, very carefully. Just like I will say, you must pick your life partners very carefully. I have the good fortune of having a woman who actually, as of next December, will be my wife of 50 years. And I feel fortunate that I picked the right partner very carefully. And when you think about that, be very careful when you're picking your partners. Wherever you go in the world, you are going to find honest people. And yes, sadly, you will find crooks. Your challenge as a deal maker or somebody who's doing intellectual property transactions is to be able to find those honest people and to do business with them and avoid the other people. You remind me of Elizabeth Holmes' story. No kidding. If you've not read the book, there is actually a book about a woman who was a Stanford graduate. She started a company called Theranos, Theranos. And there's a book called, the title of the book is Bad Blood. And I hope you can find it in Vietnamese. If not, get it in English. It is a great story about the things that she did. She was a crook, and she's now in jail for what she did. Now, is this dishonesty thing a new phenomenon? I say no. Absolutely not. I love to look at some of the old literature, and this actually comes from the Bible that people read. In 1 Samuel, this was written in 600 BC, or over 2,600 years ago. And they said, well, the father, his sons did not follow his ways. They instead pursued dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. And then there's another place where it talks about the people were skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. Well, that was written over 2,700 years ago. So some things that people do, that humans do, I'm going to call it universal, and they will come over many, many years. And you just need to be knowledgeable and aware that that could happen. Okay, let's now talk about intellectual property or IP licensing. And by the way, whenever you have acronyms in a document or a presentation or a contract, always don't use the acronym, because IP also stands for Internet Protocol. You know that, TCP/IP, IP address. Well, we're referring to IP as intellectual property. So when you're involved with that, be sure that you do that. Spell out what those acronyms mean, so you define them. So let's talk about what U.S. industrial companies look for in their IP deals. To start off with, I think they want three things. At least when I was at Lilly, this was what we normally looked for, was shared risk and shared return. In other words, if you're the inventor, you can't ask the company to take all the risk and give you all of the return, because that's not a fair deal for anybody, okay? What you want to do, and we'll come back to that in a moment, is if you have data that say that this is going to be a favorable opportunity and the product works and it's science driven, most industrial firms are going to be very interested in whatever it is that you have to talk with them about. But part of this shared risk and shared return comes back to what I call delayed gratification on the part of the licensor. If I am negotiating a deal with you and you say, I want all of my money up front and I'm not interested in any royalties or any back-end compensation, it makes me think that you don't have a lot of confidence in your technology. But if you say to me, I'm perfectly fine to wait, and if this is really, really successful, I really make a lot of money on the back end if you're also successful with this. But that means you have to delay, if you will, that gratification or that compensation that you receive from your licensee, if you're the inventor or the licensor or the university that has a patent that they're trying to license to someone. So that's important, but it plays back to the concept of shared risk and shared return, which is why I wanted to raise those. So I'm going to talk quickly about 8 search criteria that big companies look for when they're in licensing intellectual property. This will be in your slide deck. I'm just going to go ahead and knock through all the 8 items here so you can read these as we go through them. But let me catch them quickly. If you have great patents and you have freedom to operate, but also freedom to block, and that means you can keep someone from operating in a given area because your patent is so strong, that's what people call a great patent. If you've proven that your product works, it has efficacy, that's immediately going to get people's attention. If it's a blockbuster, for most people, it has to be, at least in bigger companies, if it's not $100 million, in big companies that have billions and billions of dollars in sales, $100 million, if it's $1 million, it won't move the needle. So they won't care if you bring them $1 million opportunity it's only going to sell $1 million a year. They'll go, well, that's interesting, but it's just not big enough to move the needle for us. So they probably won't be interested. It needs to be a blockbuster. It also needs to be profitable. If they can't generate enough profit from it, or if it costs too much to make, they won't be interested. And if you're in the life sciences, there are all kinds of things you have to do for what are called quality agreements, manufacturing relationship documents. You have to comply with all kinds of government laws and regulations. They're often, in the US, it's called the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, all those kinds of things that you have to comply with. Now, I've already talked about shared risk and return in the previous slide. Don't be greedy, that's important. But I believe that you should also be honest and open. You can't tell them everything you know, but you need to be honest, because if you lie to them, it will come back to haunt you. And look what happened in the case of Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes. She was not honest with the people, and what goes around comes around, and the world came back around and she ended up in prison. So that's why it's important to be honest in your dealings with people. Okay. Let's now go to, we've already now covered items 1 and 2 here. Let's now go to case studies and practical examples. I've just picked 3 of my own deals that I think are kind of interesting that I've done over several decades. I have to give you ones that are longer or have done more longer ago, because some of the ones that I did, for example, I just signed a deal with an Italian medical device company. That information is still confidential. I can say an Italian medical device company, that's a pretty, there's a lot of places you'd have to look to find that one. If I told you the name, it would be different, but these are older, which means there's more information and I can tell you more of the history behind it. These 3 stories that I'm going to tell you, first is spinosad for head lice, a product called Trifexis, and a product called CP-Zen 45. So let's take each of these in order. Let's start with spinosad for head lice. This actually is one of my favorites. Lilly, we had a drug called spinosad, Spinosad, and that particular drug had a number of potential uses. Some in crops to kill certain kinds of bugs in crops, also to kill certain kind of bugs in animals. But it also had an application for human lice. And Anonymous says, is there any official source or document that gives us a reference to raise a number? I mean, how to offer a price and find it reasonable? Actually, well, yes. If by any chance you're a member of what's called the Licensing Executive Society, LES, there's an international version of that, LESI, LES International. And LES International has essentially benchmarking studies that they do for various industries, including pharmaceuticals. And so they'll have royalty rate surveys and other things that you can get. There are also premium databases that you can subscribe to that are sometimes thousands of dollars a year, very expensive, that you can get those from, or you can find someone who subscribes to them and ask them if they can give you or search that information and share that with you if it's appropriate or they're working with you. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, because that is important to be able to have what I call benchmarking and public data that do that. So Lilly had this drug called spinosad, and it just so happened it was a naturally occurring product. It killed 100% of the lice and the nits, which are the little eggs that the lice, lay in the head of the individual. Well, that actually was an out license from Lilly, because Lilly concluded that this was not going to be a big enough product. They wanted it to be over $1 billion if they could, and they did not see that it was going to be that big. So I was the person who led that negotiation, and we licensed it to a company. And this is now the box it's called Natroba. And this product now is today, these years later, the #1 product in America for human lice and nits. And you can imagine in schools, each year, most every city has at least one school that has an episode of lice where it runs through the entire school. And lice are not, I'm going to call it respecters of persons or of wealth. And sometimes it's the wealthiest people in a school, their children get it and their children go home and their parents are embarrassed and so on. That happens. So it's quite fascinating that these kinds of things happen. But Natroba has made that possible to help people kill the lice very quickly. So today is 2024. I negotiated this deal with this company called CPRO, which stands for, just to let you know, Specialty and Environmental Products. And then Parapro is a subsidiary of that company. And that company is like parasites. It's products that kill parasites, and they're located in Indiana, actually not too far from where Eli Lilly is headquartered. And the deal involved the rights to develop and commercialize that Lilly molecule spinosad for treatment of human lice, and it was launched in 2011. Okay, so we signed the deal in 2002, and it took them 9 years before they got FDA approval to actually launch that. So it was very long, drawn-out process with the FDA to actually get the approval, but they finally did. and it's obviously now the #1 product in America because it's a fabulous product. Now, if you look closely at this, this says 2002. This was November 14th, right before Thanksgiving in America. This was a group photo at the signing of the spinosad head lice deal. And this guy right here actually is a 1.0 version of me. I'm the 2.0 version, if you will. Yes, that's when I had dark hair instead of gray hair. And I used to wear contacts. I've now given up contacts. I also have since had LASIK surgery, and I wear glasses instead. This guy actually was the guy who signed it. As you can see, he's there with his pen signing the actual document. And actually, he is now up in years. But the things that I think is just fascinating is in 2023, that's last year, 21 years later, this company called me and asked me if I could help them negotiate a complex deal for them on a project. And we worked on the project and we successfully got the deal done. And it was a very, very fascinating deal. And the reason I'm telling you this, when I say what goes around comes around and the world is round, who would have thought that 20 years later, somebody, this guy who's actually headed into retirement, he's the chairman of the company, but his son actually is the CEO. And none of these people, these are employees. The son was not yet in the company when he was younger. Anyway, his son contacted me, and he said that I really admired how you handled yourself in those negotiations because I heard about it from my father, and we would like to hire you to help us do that. So 20 years later, people, okay, and who would think? So that's a fascinating story. Okay. Let's talk about Trifexis. Now, you notice this word spinosad is the same as the one I was just showing you just a little bit ago. Well, if you took spinosad and combined it with a different drug called milbemycin oxime, could actually be used in dogs, and it's sold outside the United States under a brand called Panoramas. In the US, it's sold as Trifexis. There was an agreement that I negotiated in 2009, so that's 15 years ago. But that undisclosed agreement, believe it or not, 15 years later, to my knowledge, I have not been able to find any information about that agreement yet being disclosed. So it is still confidential. But the company, Elanco, which was the animal health division of Lilly, it's now a separate company, launched this in 2011. Why is that significant? Well, Trifexis had the most successful animal health industry product launch ever, and it sold over $100 million of product in its first year, in its launch year. And what's cute is I've got down here the YouTube link, and I checked the link to make sure this link is still good, and I watched the video. I'm not going to bore you with it today, but you can go and watch that cute video in English where they show an advertisement that you can view on YouTube, and it's kind of a fun advertisement about the product, so you can see that on YouTube. So that was Trifexis. So now let's go to the third product or project. It's called CP-Zen45. CP-Zen45 is a human drug. It's currently in late preclinical stage for what is called extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis. Most people refer to it just as XDR-TB because that's too long to say extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis. Now, interestingly, this was not even a for-profit project that I worked on. This was Lilly had a humanitarian initiative at the time with a number of partners involved, but the product that Lilly was working on at the time was not for XDR-TB, but for MDR-TB, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. XDR-TB was considered to be too tough to kill, and there was nothing that you could do. The first discussions, I will tell you, I was at dinner in Tokyo, Japan in 2007 at the Hotel Okura, also known as Okura. And this, and somebody's saying the chat box is to share general information and so on, Q&A box for posting your questions and so on. You can post them in any, and if somebody posted a question, I will make it a point to check and answer your question. Try to, at least in real time. So in 2007, I was sitting at dinner, and we were actually talking about drugs that this company had. It was then called MCRF, or the Medicinal Chemistry Research Foundation. They have changed their name, and they are now known as the Institute of Microbial Chemistry, or just IMC, as you can see here on the screen. But I was having dinner with their CEO, the chairman and CEO of this company in Japan. It was a foundation. And he was telling me that they had this drug that they had worked on for 10 years, and they were getting ready to abandon all their work. And it so happened to have remarkable efficacy against extreme drug-resistant tuberculosis. And I said, "What's the name of it?" And he said, CPZen-45. And I said, "Are you familiar with the Eli Lilly and Company Human Initiative? That's a not-for-profit, a humanitarian initiative for tuberculosis." Well, I think I've heard a little bit about it, but he said, "Well, we've done work, and the infected mice don't even have any detectable side effects or anything." And I said, "Well, we need to talk with you." Well, fast forward, that deal was started, that discussion was in 2007. We were able to finish that negotiation, and they contributed licensed that drug to Lilly for its humanitarian initiative, and it was announced in 2008. And that is just, it was probably one of the most fun projects, because it probably will affect more people and more around the world than anything else that I've worked on. Because, for example, this year, tuberculosis is right now, it's the second largest cause of death from any infectious disease in adults in China. And I know that across the world, or around the world, I think it kills over 900,000 people a year, just round figures, 1 million people a year. So it has a terrible, terrible effect. It's like 1 or 2 cases in the USA. But in other countries, particularly in China, sub-Saharan Africa, and in India, tuberculosis is a real problem. By the way, I love ChatGPT. If you have not gotten into ChatGPT yet, I encourage you to check it out. I've now been using ChatGPT for about a year. I was not one of the first users, but I'm one of the earlier users. So I just went into my subscription version, ChatGPT 4.0, and I just asked it the question, "What is the current status of CPZen-45 for XDR-TB?" Guess what? It told me. It's a promising candidate in the treatment of XDR-TB. It was correct, just developed by the Institute of Microbial Chemistry. They missed that it used to be called MCRF. It's just demonstrated effectiveness in reducing bacterial counts, and it also is combined with the drug capreomycin, which is correct. And that came from Genetic Engineering News, which is, so anyway, it found it. So that's the update on CPZen-45. After all these years, it's still working its way toward the patient, which I hope it finds its way in time. And by the way, I also asked, just for fun, I asked ChatGPT, what are the top 5 causes of death from infectious disease in adults in China? And it found from 6 different sources, and then it gave me the top 5. And you can see down here at the bottom, it tells you we came from the World Health Organization, Biomed Central, World Health Organization, and Our World in Data. So somebody was asking earlier about where you get benchmarking or information about diseases and so on. I would encourage you to use ChatGPT, because it may help you find some of the information about not only the diseases, about the deals that were done, and to find that out. Okay. How do you negotiate an IP license? Wow. ZOPAs and BATNAs. What's a ZOPA? What's a BATNA? Well, let's start first about, I have the pleasure and privilege of actually having now gone to 6 or 7 of the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meetings in Omaha in the US. And I've been a Berkshire shareholder for a number of years. But Warren Buffett, who is, of course, famous, he said, "We don't do a deal when somebody says, well, we'll do it regardless of price." He says, when that enters into the discussion, we just walk away. And that's important. You can't get what I call deal fever. You can't get so excited about the deal that you go off and do it, even though you aren't going to make any money from it. So that's important. So you want to ask, well, what is a ZOPA? Because if you're getting ready to do a deal, let's just say for purposes of this example, and we got a question, what's your advice to work with a new client who is a perfect stranger? I'm a patent attorney. I would like to make the best for them, but they don't completely trust my firm. Wow. That's a tough one. I'm the first to say new clients are always difficult. If you have real life examples that you've, like what I'm sharing with you here now, that you've done over time that you can share with him, great. But the problem is some of the deals, like the TUNET 2009 deal that I did on Trifexis, is still confidential. It has information that has still not been disclosed. So all I can tell you, it was a deal I did in 2009, and the product was Trifexis, the resulting product, and it was $100 million a year, which was great. But I can't tell you more than that about the deal that I negotiated. So it's really complicated. What I have found in people who, for example, contact me is sometimes they have been, there was an attorney actually who was sitting across the table from me in a negotiation, and I didn't even know him at the time. And then he left the law firm he was working for and went out on his own. And then he actually, because he had observed me negotiating, he asked if I could help a particular client, and it came by way of referral. So I think as you work with people over time, that will help you. It's tougher when you're younger, and that's probably if, for example, if you are working with whether it's a university tech transfer shop or like I worked at Eli Lilly. So I frankly, Lilly taught me a lot and sent me actually over 10 years to a number of negotiation training programs at Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School. And I do know that those programs that they sent me to cost over $100,000 just for the training programs. So my point is, if you have an employer who is able to and willing to spend that kind of money to train you, that might really be helpful to help you develop those skills and the credentials and the contacts. So I hope that answers your question. If not, come back. Is negotiation an art or a science? My answer is yes. I know. That's tough. I believe that some people come by negotiation naturally, and we'll come to that in a minute. And I'm going to leave this question yet to be answered because I want to, when we get a few slides back, I'm going to answer this more because science, some of it can be taught, just like here I'm talking to you about what is a ZOPA. Because if you don't understand the concept of a ZOPA and you get in a negotiation where there's not a ZOPA, then it'll be difficult for you. It'll be impossible for you. So just let's take this example in this ZOPA example where let's just say the deal has, let's just say total deal value of let's say $25 million. At least that's what you think. And you go to your boss and your boss says, you know what? I think this deal is probably worth 25 million, but I'm willing to sell it if you could get up to 25 million, that'd be great. But I'm willing to let you sell it to somebody for 20 million. Now, if you come and you get $50 million for this, that would be great. But if you tell me that you're only going to get $10 million for this, no, don't come back to me and tell me you signed that deal, because your boss will say my walkaway point, the point at which I'm going to walk away from this deal, is 20 million. So I'm giving you your instructions, if you will, before you go negotiate. You have to get at least $20 million for this deal. Well, the person on the other side of the table from you sits down from their boss, okay? And let me just say this, the seller's walk away is a point at which you would walk away rather than accept any lower payment for the deal. So that's the sellers, if you will. So now let's go and say the buyer is getting ready to come in and sit down across the table from you, and the buyer sits down across the table from their boss, and their boss says, well, I want you to get this deal done, but if you're getting ready to do this deal, you can't pay any more than $30 million for this deal. And if you come to me and you tell me that you've agreed to pay $50 million, I'm going to fire you because we can't afford this. We can't afford that much. We don't have that much money to pay for this deal. So we're only going to let you pay when you go negotiate this. You only have the authority to negotiate up to $30 million. And by the way, I mentioned the word authority to negotiate. There's an acronym called ATN, or authority to negotiate. And I literally had a letter from executives of Eli Lilly and Company that gave me that, what we called ATN at Lilly, authority to negotiate deals on behalf of the company. So what happens? You've got the buyer now saying they'll walk away from the deal rather than pay anything more than $30 million. So what happens here? Well, you've got the seller who says, well, they'll sell it for as low as 20. You got the buyer who says they'll actually pay up to 30 million. So you actually have what is called a ZOPA, or a zone of possible agreement, of $10 million, right? So here we go. Here's 20 million down here, right at the bottom of the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. You've got all this room to negotiate, and you can go all the way up to $29,999,999. But if you say, well, I need to have $30 million, the buyer says, nope, I'm walking away at $30 million. Now they might go to their boss and say, can you agree to 30 million instead of 29,999,999? And your boss will probably say yes, but they've given you a walk away and you need to respect that. Okay. So what happens? What happens? You've got this ZOPA. Okay. That's great. Now you understand what a ZOPA is, a zone of possible agreement where you can reach an agreement. But what if the situation that you come into, and this is why it's important as a negotiator to understand, what if you come into a negotiation and your buyer or your licensee's boss said, I'm not paying a penny more than $20 million. And your boss at the university says, if you don't get $30 million for this, walk away or I'll fire you. I'm not going to agree to this at all. Well, what's the situation is? Well, there's no room here between 20 and 30 million. Your boss wants you to do it for no less than 30, but these guys here won't pay more than 20. So there's never a way that you're going to get to a deal. And sometimes that happens. So when you get into your negotiation, you can get angry and start being mad and pounding your fist on the table. Don't do that. Just say, wow, it appears like we just don't have enough common ground that we can meet together, and it's called a ZOPA. So we don't appear to have a zone of possible agreement. And as much as I love chatting with you and I'd love to do a deal, I'm going to have to walk away. It's just business. And I hope someday we meet again, maybe under better circumstances. And you walk away. That's okay. That happens in real life. And I've been in situations where I walked away from a deal. So I want you to understand these happen in real life. So if you have to walk away, you need to ask yourself, well, do you have a BATNA? Well, I don't know what a BATNA is. Tell me. This is another acronym called, it's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, a BATNA is another potential deal that you might have with someone else that you can negotiate if this one that you're working on falls apart. So you're negotiating and it falls apart, but even if the deal that falls apart is better than your BATNA, if you have a BATNA, you'd like to do the deal that's better, but if it falls apart, there's nothing you can do. Let's say the person gets angry with you and just walks away and they're irrational. That happens. You still, if you have a BATNA, at least you have something and you can sign a deal with them. Okay. And always having a BATNA is key to your professional survival as a deal maker. I want to tell you another true story. When I was at Lilly, I was negotiating a deal with a biotechnology company in Santa Barbara, California. Fascinating technology. We worked on it for months. I loved the CEO. She was an amazing negotiator. She was very professional. She understood the technology. Her scientists that worked for her were top tier. Our people, they were just interacting like, this is a deal made in heaven. This is great. And we were coming up to, just like I felt like, within days of signing. Well, I call it the wrong side of the bed problem. Our head of research and development got up one morning and said, I've decided no longer to pursue this area of science and this deal that you've now been working on for months and months and months, and you're ready to sign like within the week. I want you to shut down, discontinue, quit, and walk away from these people. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is, as a deal maker, I'm going to be embarrassed. I've been working with this person for months, and this is going to hurt my credibility. And why are you doing this? The chief scientific officer said, because I'm not convinced that this science is actually going to work. So I called the CEO and I said, her name was Chris, and I said, Chris, this is one of the toughest phone calls I've ever made. I need to tell you that our chief scientific officer, head of R&D, has decided not to proceed with this deal because he's just not convinced with the science. It's not you guys. We love you guys. We'd love to do the deal, but it's not going to happen. And I just want you to know that. And she said, okay, I understand that. No hard feelings. And, and I said, well, we've drug you along this far. Most big companies or universities or whatever, if you were in the middle of that and you had dragged somebody all that distance through, it's good personal practice and good ethics to offer to pay the out-of-pocket expenses that partner incurred. And we offered to do that. She said, thank you. I appreciate that offer. That was on, I think, a Thursday or Friday, as I remember. It was like Monday or Tuesday, I saw an announcement that Chris and her company, they announced a deal with Merck. Yes, our friendly competitor, Merck and Company, the pharmaceutical company Merck, had signed a deal with Chris. So Chris was working in parallel at the exact same time she was working on the deal with us. She was working in parallel with Merck and having meetings and calls and video calls, or not video calls. I think they were all conference calls because this was before Zoom. And so she was working in parallel with Merck and had the deal with Merck ready to sign, and they signed it. Interestingly, the deal with Merck was signed. She made a lot of money and they went forward, but the science did not work out. And in the end, our chief scientific officer was actually right. He was correct about the science not working, and he just had a sixth sense that there was something that was not going to work with the science, and Merck actually discontinued the project several years later. So actually, to some extent, we dodged a bullet by not doing the deal. But Chris, the CEO of the counterpart, the BATNA, or the biotech company that I was negotiating with, she had a BATNA. She had an alternative that she immediately went to when that deal fell apart. Okay, what are some of the important skills that you need to have, and what's it like to be a licensing professional? I've done this for over 30 years. I love it. It helps make our world a better place to live. You're not on the leading edge of change, but on what I call the bleeding edge of change, with things that might not even be into the marketplace for another 5 or 10 years. And it's fascinating to see all these technologies. So let's just talk I'm going to just go through these very quickly, but I'm going to go through. I think that you have to have, I believe personally, you have to have unquestioned integrity, because if you lie to people, that will come back to haunt you. So do not lie. That doesn't mean you tell someone everything you know. You may be restricted by confidentiality agreements, and you may have to say, I'm not at liberty to discuss that, or I'm not at liberty to tell you everything about this project, because you may even know of a different company that has another technology or something that's similar to that. You also have to be flexible and creative, because just like Chris, the CEO of that biotech firm, she was not only flexible, in being able to keep those negotiations going in parallel, she was creative in negotiating with Merck and having a deal that was ready to sign with them at the same time. She was persistent, she persevered, kept things going, and obviously had a high energy level because she was able to get both of those deals done in parallel, or to the point of being signed or ready to be signed. Sense of humor, I think it helps because if you have a sense of humor, sometimes even a sense of self-deprecating humor, that's important. You have to be smart, which is high IQ, but I would argue that you also need to have a high EQ, which is an emotional quotient. And that means you have to be able to get along with other people and interact with them. And that's important. I think you have to have a natural fascination with new technologies. I have to admit, I'm a gadget geek, okay? I've got this replacement for laser pointer in my hand that I'm using. And I'm guessing that none of you have ever seen this used on a presentation before. And now you probably will find a lot of these over the next 5 or 10 years being used because the Logitech presenter is a fabulous device. Okay, I'm a gadget geek, I admit it. Years ago, there was they called it the Alpha group, not the Beta group, but the Alpha group. They picked out of the company had 20 or 30,000 employees at the time. And I happened to know the chief technology officer at Lilly at the time, and he and I were on a board together, and he asked, hey, we're going to have these things called Blackberries. It's now it's the predecessor to the iPhone. He said, would you like to have one of these 30 that we're going to be trying across the company? And I said, sure, I'll try it. So I did, and it was a lot of fun. I think you also need to be a quick study when learning new concepts. So when somebody tells you about multi-drug resistant tuberculosis and extreme drug resistant tuberculosis, you can generally get a sense of what it is and what its impact is in the world. And then I like to say that most of the people who are licensing professionals, the outstanding ones who I know, they want to help make our world a better place to live. It's not just I have a job and I'm making enough money to buy groceries and so on. We're doing stuff that's helping making the world a better place, which is a lot of fun. Now, that's personal characteristics. Let's talk a little bit about the knowledge base that you need to have to be a successful licensing professional. But if you need to start, it depends on whether in what I call you work in what's called a technology-focused activity. In other words, if you work in a biotech company or a human pharmaceutical company, that's technology-focused, okay? A technology-agnostic organization might be a university technology transfer shop that departments from all over the university send you ideas and patents and invention disclosures from everything from chemistry to biology to information technology. That's what I would call technology agnostic. But I think these knowledge domains can be most helpful for you regardless, okay? I think regardless of what you do and what you're working in, if you understand a little bit about business law, even if you're not a lawyer, that's important. We've got a question here. Were you saying that a deal breaker can be aligned? Is the amount of money is the biggest factor we should consider? I mean, there's room for further R&D. Great question. Actually, a deal breaker might not at all be the money. It may be in the case of the deal breaker for us, we had everything set, and the deal breaker was that the chief technology officer woke up one morning and said, I've decided to discontinue all of our work in this area of R&D. So it became a new deal breaker that we didn't even expect existed. So that was, now there could have been room for further R&D, and he might have been willing to pursue that, but he had the sixth sense that science wasn't going to succeed, and he ended up being right. Even as frustrating it was for me as a deal maker to make that phone call to Chris that day, it was. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, that's that. So business law is one of the first domains that's important. I think statistics are, because quite often you're working with statistics that prove whether or not something works. And if you don't know what the N is in a statistical survey or in statistics, or a standard deviation or a mean or a mode, you need to understand some of those concepts. That's very important, I believe. Oh, I said statistics. Finance and taxes, because in a lot of situations, the business deals you're doing are going to involve, if you get income as a company, particularly, you might have to pay taxes on that income, and you need to know how to value that. So concepts like net present value are subject in finance that need to at least understand the concept, even if you aren't the one who does the spreadsheets that calculate them. Biology and medicine, if you're working particularly in a university where you have back to this thing of technology agnostic organizations, if you're working where you have multiple domains coming at you, then not only finance and taxes, biology and medicine, and you also may have stuff coming at you in the areas of chemistry. And it may, for example, I did a deal in nanotechnology. And, I wasn't a nanotechnology scientist by any means, but I understood a little bit about it. So understanding a little is important. Engineering and physics, again, if you're working in technology agnostic organizations, that's important. And of course, I like to say, and rocket science and brain surgery, I'm kidding. But guess what? If you're at Stanford and you're working, or MIT, let's say, and you're working literally in rocket science, and you want to talk with SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, about something that will help his rocket land back on I don't know if you saw this, they had one that went up today. And I was watching it actually on what used to be called Twitter, now X. And so they had a real-time streaming of the rocket that was launching, I think, 20 or 30 different satellites in one rocket. But the booster goes up and then it comes back and lands on a barge out in the middle of the ocean. Absolutely it's astonishing, fascinating stuff. But I say I'm kidding, but you might work in rocket science. So consider that as well. At the end, I think the key is that broad general knowledge is beneficial. And if you understand that, you will be more successful in technology transfer. Okay, what are the kinds of tools and skills that you have? If you can grasp those scientific and technical concepts quickly, you will be more successful as a tech transfer person. But you also have to be able to say no. You can't just get angry and beat your hand on the table or hit or start yelling at somebody. That's not productive. That will not get you further to a deal. It's okay to say, I disagree with you in a nice way. You can also say, I don't believe you're telling me the truth in a very matter-of-fact way, in a nice way, and say, because of that, we're not in a position to go forward with you. You have to be, because you're juggling so many balls in the air, you have to have great organizational and planning skills. You also have to have a great memory for relevant events and issues. So today, that deal with spinosad for head lice occurred in 2002, right? 23 years ago, yet I still understand the concept of spinosad and head lice and nits and all the details related to that. If you have a great memory for those kind of events, great. If you don't enjoy that kind of juggling of data and so on, then maybe this is not the profession for you. I like to say that the skills that are needed to be a successful licensing professional are similar to those of other scientific and technical professions. Even though I'm not a PhD, I will say there are a lot of PhDs who are scientific and technical first, and then, for example, they get their certified licensing professional designation. Here's my recommendations to you from 35 plus years of doing global deals. I think you should build relationships, not just pursue transactions, because the transactions that you do will probably be forgotten very quickly, and the deals you did over time. But you're going to build relationships with people, just like those people who I got to know and like, and they were across the table from me in the C-Pro Parapro deal that I did with spinosad, and they came back to me 20 plus years later and said, we'd like you to help us with the deal, which was just amazing. I like to say, always take pictures of people with whom you meet. I happen to have been the photo editor of the yearbook when I was in high school and college. And that picture that you saw of me in the signing ceremony with the spinosad deal, I obviously couldn't take that picture. Somebody else did, but I coordinated having that. And then the other is, I say, take notes on when, where, and under what circumstance you first meet each person who gives you their business card. Okay? Why do I say that? Well, you store your business card images and the background information about the person and person who you meet. My last boss at Lilly said to me, he says, Paul, your Rolodex is your core competency. And I said, well, I've been trying to figure out what my core competency is for 25 years. He was one of my best bosses, by the way. But you go, well, what's a Rolodex? Because this is something that was in the old days. People don't have Rolodexes today. In the old days, I'm asking, what is a Rolodex? In the old days, people had these things that they kept on their desks. And as you look around some places, you actually might still see some of these on people's desks. Rolodex, I think, still in business. But most people have now replaced the Rolodex with a thing called an iPhone, okay? Because you can keep all of your address book and everything else information in your iPhone rather than having it on index cards, and you can take your iPhone with you. A Rolodex is rather hard, very difficult, okay? The interesting thing is, I actually went in and searched my iPhone, and as of today, my iPhone has 10,034 contacts in it, okay? So that's the number of contacts. And I've also, just for fun, I looked here, and maybe you can see in here. So this is Trang's name, okay? This has her information. So when I meet somebody, so I first met Trang in Ho Chi Minh City in 2014 when I traveled to Vietnam at the request of the World Intellectual Property Organization to teach a week-long class with Pat O'Reilly and Olga Spasek from December 15th to the 19th, 2014, inclusive, on licensing and negotiations. So now I remember, out of those 10,000 plus people, where was it? When was it? Was anybody else involved? And it helps you remember those names, because there's no way that you can remember 10,000 people out of all those circumstances. Okay, we've got a question. Should licensing professionals also be equipped with IP knowledge for knowledge base and negotiation skills apart from those you mentioned? Yes, ideally. I will tell you, there are some people, in fact, I considered getting a law degree. About halfway through my career at Lilly, I was thinking of going and getting a law degree at night, a law school at night. And I actually talked to our general counsel about it. And he said, Paul, here's the problem. We keep authority to negotiate and approval as to legal form separate. And in fact, we have a third approval as authority to commit. So there is someone who signs the contract, that's called ATC. There is the authority to approve as to legal form, which is always a lawyer, but the lawyer cannot have negotiated the deal. So we had at least 3 separate people always touching any deal that was significant in the company. So he said, so you can go get a law degree, but he said, you can still be a lawyer, but you won't be the person who can approve this as to legal form. You'll always have to go off and get somebody else. So I hope that answers your question. You could have IP knowledge. You could be a patent attorney or a patent agent. And that's a great skill, a great knowledge to learn. But for me, he said, you are a great negotiator, and we want you to, continue negotiating that. So if that doesn't answer your question, chime back in. Back to art and science, because I think there's a few more. How did I get into a licensing career? Because I think this is significant for you all if you're thinking about professionally being a negotiator. Oh, you're actually a Rolodex. Even IP Vietnam doesn't store the 2014 WIPO workshop anymore. Okay, take notes. Okay, I might be able to find that if yes. Okay, I still have that presentation slide deck and a PDF of that. When I started at Lilly, I was willing to travel extensively, and I have high energy. I will tell you, I was raised on a working farm. Actually, my family farm is still there. I left the family farm. I was the black sheep, they call it, who left the family farm. But we also had livestock. So our cattle farm, and actually we had pigs and chickens when I was young, we had there. And the reason that that's significant is there are now people who say that people who are raised on livestock farms, where they're exposed to a lot of fecal material, in other words, the manure from cattle and pigs and so on, actually gives you a more robust GI system, and you're less likely to get things like food poisoning and so on. And that's significant because I had a guy who worked for me and said, Paul, I want to be just like you. I want to travel around the world and negotiate these deals. I said, let's just start off, easy. Let's just put you on a plane to New York, go out one night out, and then come back the next day. So he went out and he came back. And he was out of work for 3 days with traveler's diarrhea. Needless to say, he just did not have the ability to do that. And I said to him, he needed to find a job where he stayed inside as opposed to did travel, because that probably wasn't. Anyway, so that's high energy and traveling. I'm flexible. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy taking photographs. I mentioned about being the photo editor. When people ask, why are you such a good negotiator? I sometimes joke, well, I had 3 older sisters and only 1 bathroom when I was a kid. It is actually true that I had 3 older sisters, and we actually had more than 1 bathroom, but one of the bathrooms was kind of reserved for mom and dad. So there were times when I'd have to say, I just need to come in real quick. And my big sister was in the bathtub, so I'd have to say, keep my eyes closed. Can I come in and go in the potty? And so on and so forth. My point is, sometimes that humor can be self-effacing, and people laugh or chuckle, and that can be good, and it also connects you with your people. So anonymous participant says, should we have an in-house licensing profession, or can we count on external licensing professionals when negotiating the deal? I'm going to answer this as a crazy question. It depends. It depends on the size of the deal, what risks you have as an organization. I actually will tell you, I have a client in Indianapolis who had me negotiate a deal for him, and I will tell you now because it's been long enough. It was with Eli Lilly and Company. He had a term sheet he was ready to send off to Lilly. He presented it to the board of his company, his little company. And it so happened that the chairman of this company was a longtime friend of mine. We'd known each other for over 20 years. And he said, don't send that term sheet to Lilly. Press hold. Do not press send on that. Wait. And I think we can level the playing field. So they engaged my services to help them negotiate their deal. The deal that we signed with Lilly 99 days later. And in Lilly, just to let you know, anything less than 100 days is considered fast at Lilly. I actually have a term called dwell time. And in my career, the fastest deal I did when I was at Lilly was 72 days. Since I've retired, the fastest deal I've done is 54 days. But back to this deal I did, the deal we'd signed was 29% better on a net present value basis than he thought that his term sheet he was ready to make concessions on. Why is that significant? Well, if it's involving a lot of money, maybe there's value in bringing in someone to help you. And what's interesting is, after I did that deal, of course, I was his new best friend because I had done this. He got ready to do the next deal, and he came to me and he said, I'm going to go do this deal. And I said, well, yeah, you could hire me as your external licensing professional to help you. But 2 things. The deal you're getting ready to do is small enough. If it doesn't work out, you're not going to crash the company, if you will, or you won't go bankrupt. And you don't need to have this deal. And I think it would be good for you to learn from this deal. So I will tell you, I coached him in the background. The people on the other side of the deal never even knew I existed. I never sat down at the table with that other partner, and the CEO of this company got the deal done successfully, and it worked out great. So that was fun, a situation where I did a deal for him as an external, but then I was just an advisor and almost a friend to him to counsel him, and he was able to get the smaller deal done, but he was really proud, and I was proud of him for doing it because he did a good job on it. I also, though, want to leave you with, the reality is that I came into licensing much more by accident than by any intention, or I went to a school, because there was no college level training program for intellectual property licensing when I was a college student. I went to Purdue University in agricultural economics or ag business management. And I will tell you, I was planning to go back to our farm. So, the licensing thing happened when I got a Lilly, and they needed somebody to negotiate a deal, and they asked me if I would help them, which I did. So that's that. The other is, I would say, is it's heavy travel, particularly if you're involved in larger deals that involve complex global technologies. I've been in 44 countries. The downside of that is I've given up a lot of my life sitting on airplanes. I jokingly say, people say, well, what's your home address? And I'll say, well, you could just say Boeing would be easy because I spend a lot of time on Boeing airplanes. What I realized after I retired from Lilly is that I missed a lot of family events and a lot of weekends, and it really would have been nice to have been there and not miss those. But I also made a living and was able to make a good living and provide for my family and my kids and pay for their college and so on, which was something I wanted to do. So that's it. The other I would say is, if you're involved in IP licensing, you need to expect and be very flexible, because your schedule is going to be very unpredictable. And here are two true stories. I once came to my office and my bag was packed. Okay. What I didn't know was whether I was going to get on a plane and go to France, or I was going to go to Florida from Indianapolis that day. In the end, that day, I flew to Florida to negotiate a deal. Another time, I came to the office and I was packed, but I didn't know if I was going to go to New York City and negotiate a deal, or if I was going to go to Los Angeles. Literally, I did not know. And for a lot of people, they can't handle that uncertainty or the unpredictability. They're going, I need to be able to plan, to be able to tell my family, I know where I'm going to end up tonight. No, that's not the case. And sometimes I was going places, if it was a small company where my counterpart was part of a public company, I actually didn't tell my wife where I was going, because if it was publicly disclosed, it actually might have an implication for their stock price. So there were times that I had to maintain confidentiality for that. That's that. Okay, there was another question. So that was in-house licensing professional, or count on external. If you've got the in-house people and you can develop them, that's great. The other thing I've seen done, and I've actually helped people where I help, for example, I've helped some people help to interview and decide who to hire. And then the other is, there's sometimes that there are brokers, I think, who deal with, I'm going to call it IP brokerage. I don't see those, particularly in universities, working very well. Most universities have their own full-time or people in-house. And even if you don't have a lot of in-house talent, if you think you could give it a try and see if you can do it. Just make sure you have a good attorney. Every deal I negotiated, I always had Lilly, a good attorney sitting on my left side, and a good either medical doctor, a PhD scientist, or a doctor of veterinary medicine sitting on my right side, because it depended on the technology area that I was involved with. So with that, I will entertain other questions that you have. I hope this has been informative, educational, and maybe just a little bit entertaining. You see my email address there and my LinkedIn. That's another thing, is if you're going to get to 10,000 people connected in the world, make sure that you're connecting with them on LinkedIn, because right now, at least, that is the global standard for connecting with people in business. And what I will tell you is, I find that the people who send me LinkedIn invitations are the ones who end up being very successful in IP licensing. And sometimes I'll teach a course like this out of 80 people or 100 people, and if I get 2 LinkedIn invitations, well, that's fine. But that probably suggests that there's maybe 88 or 89 who might not be all that interested in being IP licensing professionals, because they don't want to build their network of people around the globe. That's okay. And particularly if you're a PhD and you love the lab and you want to stay in the lab, then do that. What I say is, do what your heart leads. If it makes your heart sing, then do it. And what I do, the IP licensing that I do makes my heart sing, and that's why I'm here talking with you all today. So with that, other questions anybody has? If not, I will turn the turn the thing back to Trang. And is negotiation an art or a science? I hope maybe you've seen that there's a little art to it, but there's science, and some of that science can be trained. So, for example, you learn what is a ZOPA, so that you learn if you get into negotiation and you're going, we just can't get to any place where we're meeting. And actually, one of the courses that Lily sent me to at Harvard Business School was a negotiation that did not have a ZOPA. And so it was intentionally designed that you would never get to a deal. So you're in there, supposed to be competing, and you're supposed to, get a deal done, and then you report back about how wonderful your deal was. And basically everybody is supposed to come back, and there was no deal to be had because there was no ZOPA. And what's funny is some people didn't understand the instructions correctly and gave up everything, which would have meant they lost their job. But anyway, so that's why if you're in a negotiation, you say, I just don't think we have a ZOPA here. And they might even go, what's a ZOPA? Well, it's a zone of possible agreement. It's where you kind of have your instructions on what you can do, and I have mine, and maybe there's a way we could get together, but right now it's not feeling that way. And is there anywhere else that you could make a concession, or that would help? And sometimes somebody will say, well, I could do this, and all of a sudden everything breaks loose, and all of a sudden you have a deal. So anyway, thank you. It's inspiring to know that there's 80 or 100 people who are even thinking about being in the intellectual property licensing profession, because it's an absolutely wonderful profession, and I admire all of you for considering it. So with that, Trang, do you want me to turn off the sharing on my presentation? I did put in at least one thing to tell you thank you. And again, there's my email and LinkedIn. And again, thank you very much. This has been great.
Wow,
Frank?
such an insightful. Yes, I'm here. Wow, such an insightful section.
Does this bring back memories of 10 years ago when I was with you?
Oh, see, people is wow.
It seems like yesterday. It seems like yesterday that I was with you guys. So anyway,
we extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Paul Stewart. People whose expertise and passion have enriched our understanding of IP matters, specifically in licensing and negotiation. You all participants, your active attending has made this event engaging and meaningful. We wish you continued success, and for now, goodbye. See you around. And one more thing. I'm sorry, I just forgot. But technically, we would appreciate if you could spare about 2 minutes to complete a survey that we will send you via email or post on our webpage. We're interested in knowing if you are satisfied with this webinar in particular and our future one, and feel free to give us any suggestions. After completing our survey and based on Zoom records of your participation, you will receive a certificate of attendance signed by Fulbright University Vietnam. Okay, goodbye for now. And Paul, see you again.
Thank you. This has been delightful. Bye-bye now.